welcome everyone, welcome to PFP, welcome to the Jellicoe Building. My name is Will Loughnane, I'm Chief Commercial Officer here at Places for People. I've got the privilege of introducing this session this afternoon, so I'll begin 4 minutes. If I pause for breath, it might take a bit longer than 4 minutes, so bear with me. But I'm just going to start by saying, just imagine waking up tomorrow without a decent home to live in. That was a challenge faced by one of our founders of Place for People, a gentleman called Father Basil Jellicoe. This is about 100 years ago. He was faced with his own mission to address poverty and overcrowding in Somerstown. So if you're familiar with this part of London, a bit between Euston and St Pancras, that area is called Somerstown. Father Basil chose to address that contemporary housing crisis. And he did that by setting up an organisation called St Pancras House Improvement Society, which is now known as Origin Housing, which is part of Place for People. So it's very relevant to us in our journey, which we'll talk about as well. And his approach to community-based housing and welfare maybe was innovative for the time, but social housing certainly transformed that area and the community and the lives of the people that live there. So 100 years later, clearly life's very different today in many regards. We know there's 170,000 children living in temporary accommodation in the UK, and each day they wake up without a decent place to call home. So I think this is why we're here. So if I may, a little bit about Places for People if you don't know who we are. So we're the UK's leading social enterprise. We exist to build, to manage and to support thriving communities. We have 13,000 colleagues providing community-based housing at a national scale. We manage affordable homes on behalf of our landlords and investors, and we provide leisure, health and wellbeing services in those communities as well. We lead the sector with the largest affordable housing development pipeline, and we're tackling the industry skills crisis head-on through our recently launched Thrive Academy. And this is our new training academy that we launched last month. And this is to do our bit to help fill the 140,000 vacancies with threatened house building progress. And we believe that housing is more than bricks and mortar. It's the foundation for opportunity, stability and dignity. And we don't compete with other housing associations or other developers. We don't compete with anyone in this room. Our competition is homelessness, simple as that. And so just on modular housing, so we believe it can be a fast, effective solution to the temporary accommodation crisis. But the response to the crisis needs to treat it as an emergency. This requires partnership, collaboration, and new ways of working. At PFP, we've been building our own capabilities in the provision of end-to-end modular housing solutions. We're going to talk about Bristol today. We've got a few colleagues here from Bristol. We've delivered 3 schemes in Bristol. So we've delivered 1-bedroom modular homes at Stonebridge Park, complementing a similar development on Derby Street in partnership with Bristol City Council. And our 3rd Bristol scheme, Fortfield Road, recently received planning permission and is in production at the moment with our in-house manufacturer called Modularize. So as PFP, we can bring land, we can bring local authority partnerships, we can bring modular design and manufacturing capabilities, and we can provide the wraparound supporting services for vulnerable people, like support for mental health, digital inclusion, access to benefits, training, really to help vulnerable people live independently and transition to permanent accommodation. So the homes that we're bringing forward in Bristol are more than just shelter, but we can only do so much. In the new year, we'll have a portfolio to 20 supported modular housing units in the city of Bristol, but this is just scratching the surface. We can deliver at a modest scale, but to deliver at full scale, the industry needs to come together in partnership. So, welcome today. I think Housing Festival's ambition for scale and modular delivery is a great step towards addressing the temporary accommodation crisis. I think success depends on all of us, so modular manufacturers, local and national government, trade groups, sector partners, and academia. Better homes, stronger communities, and brighter futures for people in need are all within our reach if we act together. I think every conversation we have today, this afternoon, is a step towards addressing the crisis in temporary accommodation and creating housing that truly works for everyone. When we combine our expertise, our resources, and our determination, we don't just build homes, we build hope. So thank you all for being here today. Will, thank you so much, and my thanks to Place for People for hosting us. I'm Jess Sweetland, I am one of the project directors at the Housing Festival, and I want to just recognise we're really grateful to these panellists. Mayor Copley, I know you have to leave probably at 5, so if he just leaves, it's not because he's offended or upset.
I'm not walking out.
But what we're hoping today is that we've got these panellists that have got experience of delivery of what we're going to talk about today, but what I'm really acutely aware of is that in the room there's a huge amount of experience. You're here because we think you are people that are interested, invested in and working on projects that have a sort of a congruity with this, and so what we want to do is bring this expertise together because it's about getting stuff done. The one thing the housing industry and the housing crisis needs is more talk shops. What we need is to work out how we get stuff done together. So my thanks to Strata for sponsoring today, my thanks to these panellists who are giving up their time. Actually, they're not giving up their time, they've been working on this like machines for the last years to do this in the real world, and this is what we need, that commitment, that perseverance. I know that we share that together. I'm going to do a gear change to say 2 things before I hand over to our chairperson, Ellen. The first thing is toilets and fire escapes. So if you need the loos, you just go through this door, you should have a pass. The toilets are just in the main foyer on the right as you leave the main foyer area on the right. If there is a fire escape, there is not one planned, then essentially if you go back to where the lifts are, there is then a staircase that will lead you down. That's the key, go down. And leave the building and then just meet out in the common area outside. So that's toilets, that's fire escape. The last thing is that, to let you know, we are filming today. What we're going to try and do is put this together to capture kind of the essence of what we're talking about. If you do not want to be filmed, I'm really sorry. So I don't really have a plan B. We are filming, we may take some photos. But seriously, if you don't want to be filmed, then I suggest please don't put your hands up and ask questions. It'll be easy to edit you out. And the last thing I want to say is simply this. One of the things we at the Housing Festival see ourselves as a think and do tank. So we work in and through local government to drive and deliver change in the real world because the housing crisis needs real delivery. But we recognise it is a community. It is the people in the room, it's the people on the panel, it's us coming together to drive the change, the system change that we need to work on collectively. And in that space, what I want to recognise is that one of the things we have started to sort of curate is the Building Better community of practice. Some of you may have heard of Building Better. It was a partnership with a number of RPs, particularly looking at the space of commissioning and procuring an MC. Well, we've kind of taken that, we've come together with that organisation, and we want to really focus on specific issues that have particular actions that we can work on collectively. So we'll talk a bit more about that at the end, but there's an opportunity if you leave today saying, yes, there's something here I want to be part of, there's something here I want to contribute to, my professionalism and my personal passion. Then we've got some envelopes that you can drop your name badge in to say please follow up, and we will do so. Conversely, if you never want to hear from us again, we won't be offended. Well, no, we will be offended, but we'll accept. That's absolutely fine. So you're really welcome. We're so pleased you're here. Again, thanks to Places for People, to Strata for these panellists. We'll get to a Q&A later. This is a shared conversation. As I say, there's expertise in the room, and we want to make sure that we're starting to bring that out. This is not just meant to be a one-way presentation pitch this afternoon. So thank you for being here. Ellen, over to you.
Well, I'm actually going to hand straight over to Tom to give us a bit of an introduction, please, to the London context and where this conversation fits really with your role and experience in the
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Jez and Will. And Will, as it happens, I once lived briefly in Somerstown, so I'm not sure if it was one of your blocks. I think it was a Camden council block. But amazing social housing around there, places like the Beta House, absolutely fantastic. I'm going to talk in quite general terms because we've got other people here who are the experts. But obviously we have an enormous housing challenge in London, and we have an enormous housing need. That incredible figure of 88,000 homes a year that the government has given us as a housing target, extremely challenging. Meanwhile, 1 in 21 children in London are living in temporary accommodation. Councils are spending £5.5 million a day on TA. It really is, the biggest challenge facing London boroughs. So it's a huge financial cost, a huge economic cost, but of course it's a huge personal cost for the people who are affected. And Sadiq and I meet people who have moved into the brand new council housing that we have funded as the GLA. And we meet people who have been living in TA for 14 years, 15 years. And the kind of places they're living in are absolutely terrible. overcrowded. So we need solutions to the housing crisis, but we need in general, and we need solutions to the TA crisis in particular. We're very proud to have secured £11.7 billion a year settlement from the government for the Social and Affordable Homes Programme, which is London's largest and longest term ever. But building these social and affordable homes will take time, and we need solutions now to London's TA crisis. And I believe that demountable modular housing can be an important solution. So I was first introduced to the concept of, modern methods of construction, modular housing, and the famous place Ladywell, which of course was absolutely groundbreaking. And I remember visiting with the Mayor of Lewisham at the time and standing in these, in the kitchen of this incredible flat, which of course was indistinguishable inside from a kitchen in any traditional build flat. And I thought how lucky the people who would be housed there would be. But of course, there are very, very few people who get to benefit from that. And unfortunately, the place concept in general didn't quite take off. And I know there's been a lot of learning from that, which is now feeding in to future versions of this concept. And we were delighted, in a way, in an attempt to promote this, to host the demountable module developed by Roll and Waits at City Hall. And again, the interior of that, a 2-bed flat, a separate kitchen, very high ceiling, because apparently it can also be used for schools. And just an unimaginably different experience from where most people in TA are ending up. And shelter, of course, mocked up a kind of hotel room, which reflected, the kind of place that, frankly, too many people do end up living in. And I'm really keen that the GLA and the GLA family, like TfL, lead by example on this. So, we're looking at our land, whether we've got sites that could be used for a concept like this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the case studies, learning a little bit more about this, and back to you, Ellen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thanks to Will and Jez and Tom for framing our conversation so nicely. My name's Ellen Grist. I'm the Research and Evaluation Lead for the Housing Festival team. And it's an absolute privilege to be here this afternoon and kind of walking us through this afternoon's programme. We have got quite a lot to cover in quite a short period of time, so I'm going to be watching the clock and keeping the panelists moving. So forgive me if I'm sort of looking at you, or if I need to interrupt. It's not personal. We just need to keep the conversation moving. Darren, I am going to be coming to you first, just as a heads up. I will pop just so you know, that I will pop a picture of some photos of your project up on the screen behind you. Is anybody in the audience here involved in this Havering scheme? Oh, lots! Amazing. Brilliant. That's really
That's right.
That is really good. Great. So Darren, I'll come over to you. Can I get you to introduce yourself and to Hugh, and really give us a bit of context about where this project that you're delivering came from, how it came about, your role, and I guess what challenge it's meeting in Havering.
Sure. Okay. Afternoon all. So my name is Darren Alexander. I currently work for Havering Council as the Assistant Director of Housing Demand. Much of my role is actually homelessness and temporary accommodation, but I have had a previous role in development with another local authority, and I think that's what's brought this in, because attending housing conferences and actually getting to see a modular demo in Manchester at one of the conferences drove the idea that actually there are other solutions, palatable solutions as well, and that was probably the key element to it. So when I came back to the office, there was also quite an attractive grant for, and it was mainly for rough sleepers as well, the rough sleeper accommodation grant that was offering that support to deliver a modular initiative. And Jez spoke about successful delivery. Actually, I started with unsuccessful deliveries as well, and that's probably the key element to it, that I secured quite significant money, so about 3 million, to try to deliver modular housing, but you know, the internal challenges made that unsuccessful. But with this particular scheme, I already knew that there was land available, and so those conversations were already happening in terms of, you know, what meanwhile size strategically could we look at to push this forward and get a modular scheme on board. And then, thankfully, Waits had already got a part of the regen program, had already had sight of some of the meanwhile sites, and were happy to have the conversation about how to go about delivering it for families. So I'd sort of shifted that movement from single people to families. And then, thankfully, partners who were in the room today were sat around the table talking about how could we do that for families, what would the model look like, and then actually went out to have the conversation with the families that are experiencing living in quite difficult circumstances. So that probably brought us to where we are today.
Super. And Hugh, do you want to tell us your involvement and maybe describe a little bit about, I know people will have had a bit of a description in the pre-reading, but not everybody will have seen that. Do you want to just give us a few minutes to describe what's been...
So I'm Hugh, I'm Business Director for Modular, but when this journey started, I was actually a Development Director looking after the regeneration partnerships, one of which with the Havering team. What became apparent about 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, is that the development world was getting tougher and tougher to make things work, and a particular project where we'd gone through the demolition, it was caught, as a number of people no doubt will sympathise with the 2 staircase and viability challenges of 2023. And as a result, we looked, we sort of as a team, we looked at what else could we do whilst the permanent homes were becoming more and more challenging to deliver. And we had experience of delivering into the hundreds of relocatable homes now with Cardiff City Council and the Welsh Government and Developer Morgan. And so with Havering and with a number of sort of partners in the room, we sort of took a number of study tours over to Cardiff, also over to Bristol, to see sort of in some of the schemes which have been delivered already, to just learn and understand how we could copy the approach and make it work for London. So the scheme that you can see on the screen is the 5th phase of a 5-phase development that in its full capacity will deliver 1,400 homes for the local community, and that 5th phase isn't going to be developed for sort of at least 7 years. So we undertook a design exercise with our friends at HTA, who I can see Rory in the room, and I think Rory, you were one of the people in the room when we sort of sat down as a sort of I'll call it a coalition of doers, because, you know, to Jez's point, this is about lifting it off the page from a conversation and a nice sort of idea to actually, well, how do we make it work? And then that journey started, not just the design piece, but really trying to do a depth of research about the challenges that the sector has seen. And in conjunction with sort of delivering the project, we were looking at the supply chain, we were looking at the different parts of the ecosystem, and actually not so much how it differs from the traditional development and construction world, but actually how similar it is and how we can take those lessons learned from a traditional construction and development approach to off-site and meanwhile. And here we are, a few months off from having the homes delivered. They're shortly going into manufacture to be delivered towards the end of Q1 next year. And yeah, watch this space.
Super, thank you so much. Right, let's come to the Bristol case study. I'm going to hand it to Andrew and get you to introduce yourself, and Angus. Let me swap the slides so you've got a picture. Anyone involved in the audience involved in the Bristol scheme? Super.
Okay,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Yes, I'm Andrew. I'm one of the directors at Housing Festival, but also working as a temporary accommodation transformation manager in Bristol City Council. So, and we've been working with Angus on delivering 5 units on a leaseback model. So the question we were really posed was, how can you deliver more housing when you haven't got capital? HRA doesn't have the budget, general fund doesn't necessarily have capital available. How can we deliver more housing? So a kind of a proposal was put together of Angus, who had a funder behind him that was willing to sort of take the risk of the moving of the unit after the initial lease term, which was 7 years for these first 5 homes. And we then would enter into we give him our land for a peppercorn rent. We then, when the units are completed, we go for full planning. Then we lease them back and onward lease them to an RP who can deliver them as exempt accommodation with support for the TA households. At the end of the lease term, 7 years, we can either say, actually, thanks, we're done, and Angus moves the units, or we extend the lease. So we went for full planning because we think, which may shock you, we think that maybe as a local authority we wouldn't be in a position in 7 years to develop permanent housing because we haven't developed it for 40 years on those sites. So here are the lovely pictures. So these 5 were all gentle infill, so it's individual sites, mainly on prefab developments that we want to regen at some point, but they were vacant plots effectively that we wanted to develop. So that's probably enough of that. We can talk more about it. Angus, you can introduce yourself as our trusted partner.
The only people who do. I'm Angus Fraser of MMC Home Building. My background is not actually the construction industry. My background is as an accountant. I specialised in insolvency, business turnarounds, trying to save companies. I was an early pioneer in the renewable industry in the country here. I developed the templates for rooftop solar that were funded and things. And through that, I was deploying money for pension funds. And I basically, near the end, I said to some of the funds, I said, look, we need social housing in the country. The councils can't afford it. You want long-term income streams. Why don't we go to councils and say, we'll fund housing on your land and you can have it back in time. And from there, basically, it developed, it got into the homelessness. Then I got approached by the Bishop of Prisons who said, I've been given your name, would you employ prisoners? And I said, well, let's have a look at that. So Prisoners Building Homes was launched from our factory. We built these houses you see using prisoners. And then I kept being told I should meet a guy called Sweetland. And finally Jez came to my factory and I said to him, Jez, you've got a temporary accommodation problem. I'm sure you've got some land. I didn't know that. I was genuinely innocent. I said, why don't we just build some houses on your land for you, trying to get it? And Jez said, yeah, we thought that was a good idea. And so, in fairness, Tom Reinhardt, the leader of the council at that time, came up to the factory and had a look, and he just said, I'll support this. And he said, I'll get you some sites. Well, in fairness, it took about 9 months for Jez and Tom to get the sites released to us. But and we just and we just said, well, we have to do this. We just have to prove this that it works, and we've done it. And I want to say that the last 3 that we've done have been inspected by 3 different building control inspectors. They all wanted to have a look because they'd never seen anything like this before. And we got 0 defects reports on each of the houses. And the senior inspector said to us, look, just by comparison, because we thought that was very good, but we weren't sure. And she said, look, by comparison, we've been to a tier 1 development earlier this week. Didn't tell us who, of course, professional, which is good. And said they averaged 50 defects a house, and we had 0. And we've done that with prisoners on day release and ex-prisoners who we think are good and given permanent jobs to. And I did give an undertaking to Jez when he said, I'll give this a go. I said, Jez, I promise you I will deliver this. So I sit here, we've delivered it. And we've got people in them. I spoke to the chief executive of Elam. now a subsidiary of Places for People. Just yesterday, he said to me, Angus, one of the new tenants used the G word. He said, you don't hear it very often. He said, they said, I'm not sure we're supposed to say it, but we're just so grateful to be able to live in this house. So,
thank you so much. Right, I'm going to switch back. As a research and evaluation leader, now I get asked my favourite sort of questions, the kind of reflective, evaluative set of questions. So, Darren, I'm going to come to you. What is it that you're most, I know your scheme's not quite finished and it will be delivered next year, but what are you most pleased with about this process today or to date, or what are you most hopeful about in terms of this delivery of this project?
I think for me is the connection between regeneration teams and the homeless arena. That's sometimes the most difficult because meeting need and meeting viability are always a difficult conversation. So how do you meet need and viability at the same time? So that, I think, has been probably the most pleasing part, because once you get over that hurdle, it shows that there's actually other things that can be done. So I think that's probably the thing that has made it work. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And Hugh, similar question. What are you kind of most excited about, proud of, in terms of delivering the project?
I think it's been really exciting to see how we've brought people together from all over the sector, and you know, the word to sort of summarise it is collaboration, and just sort of I don't think I've told Dave this, but actually I was listening to a podcast that he delivered back in the spring, and just it was so nice that all the different work that people are doing across the sector, there's a lot of synergy, and what that shows is that we're all barking up the right tree, and we're all in the room here sharing the solutions that have worked, and there are real solutions that have worked. There's still barriers to them, but I'm confident that between the different people in the room, most of you guys got much bigger brains than me, can come together and overcome the solution, to find the solutions that will get us through funding, planning. You know, there's not going to be one size fits all. I think we can all agree that, but you know, between us, we can start deploying this at scale.
Super. And I know from these projects that it's not all plain sailing. This doesn't happen easily. So Darren, kind of the other side, like what hurdles have you had to overcome so far? What have you already learned in this?
So it's about the hearts and minds, which has been the big challenge, because it does take a bit of courage to be able to step forward and say, all right, we're going to do things quite differently, and there's very little templates out there that have already done it that's been successful and sustainable. So having the hearts and minds and the will to say, all right, we're going to have to put our foot forward and to just get it done. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges. And then when you've got that, you've got to bring everyone else on board with you, who probably have other aspirations for, you know, the land that's there, aspirations for how, you know, the finances work. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge is to get the hearts and minds together and to be congruent and not on the same page.
And Hugh, a kind of similar question. What have you already seen? What has evolved on this journey, or do you foresee needing to be different next time you approach it similar?
I think the biggest evolution that we're going through at the moment is the delivery model from a commercial perspective. So I mean, Havering's really backed this as a concept in a traditional client contractor purchase sort of arrangement, and taking the lessons from Angus and the Bristol team on how lease models work for the London market. You know, that's, I think, the next step which we're working through, to just provide an option for a local authority to not have to fund everything up front while keeping it affordable.
Right, let's have a similar reflection on the Bristol project from Angus and Andrew. Andrew, coming to you first. As the client, what are you most pleased with?
Yes. well, Angus has touched on quality of the homes, and in some ways, I think that was always a certain in terms of the product. You're relatively confident it's going to be very, very good, and it is. I think actually navigating the TA subsidy regime, housing benefit rules, it's quite a you have to find this sweet spot where you get the convergence of the subsidy regulation with the housing benefit rules, with how you deal with the rent standard, how you can then sublease onto an RP, and what are the requirements for that, and finding a route where we can deliver housing on a model that actually doesn't require upfront capital from the local authority, gives a better lived experience for the household in TA, delivers savings for the local authority, gives them support for a house that is effectively a permanent property, NDSS compliant with full planning permission. And as a council, you sit down and go, yes, we want to do that. And then other people in council go, do we want to do that? I don't know if we want to do that. And you think, but we said we want to do that, because you're not one, you're one organisation with 17,000 organisations inside it. And so trying to cross those different bridges, those different departments, to kind of get them to slightly tweak their processes or embrace a new process, to deliver a new outcome in a new way, is hard. It's hard work, and so I'm just glad we kind of got there, and that the model works, and that the flow of the agreements is working really well, and ultimately we do the efforts, then the household can move out of a overcrowded mouldy property into somewhere decent. So that would be me. How about you, Angus?
Well, listening to you, I know why I'm tired now.
Yeah, I didn't do any work.
I think I try and always have equilibrium and try and create holistic circles, and I think we've shown it and done it in Bristol. We've taken vacant land. Each of the sites had been 10, most of them 14 years vacant. We've created houses that have given employment to prisoners. We have literally transformed the lives of the people who have occupied them, and we've delivered a cash saving to the council.
Yeah.
Now that to me is a holistic circle. And when we started, there was so much skepticism. We wouldn't do it, it couldn't happen, it wouldn't work, and all the rest of it. And we've done it. And now it's about scaling it up. We know what to do, how to do it, and it is scalable. It is, and let's not forget my background. There is a huge cash saving here.
Yeah.
I mean, councils are spending millions. Well, we can save that. I mean, I think it's fair to say you've disclosed the figures to me and what have you. The saving per house after you've paid us rent is about 35,000 a year. Well, we do 1,000 houses in London. That's 35 million a year saved. So, there is absolutely no reason why this can't be continued, repeated, and rolled out. That's the biggest thing. And the other little thing, the nice bits, was that, doing the visits, and, we didn't broadcast to the neighbours or anything that these were prisoners and prisoners on day relief, and some of them have done some pretty horrible crimes, but I do want to defend them. Two of them were done ex-armed forces, and their crimes were committed when they were facing post-traumatic stress. And so this is about giving them a second chance. And one of the neighbours was disabled and things, and each time they came with the shopping, our guys stopped, carried their groceries into the house and did that sort of thing for them. And that to me made me feel very proud.
Thanks so much. And Andrew, what of this process, obviously these are now delivered, what about this process has been tricky or needs to be modified next?
I'd probably say it's very easy. No, a few things, lots of things. So one big thing was we said to Angus, hey, we're going to give you some sites that are ready to go, you just plonk your houses on, get planning, tick, 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 and then turned out that we'd buried some other buildings in the ground that we gave him that had asbestos contamination in, and we didn't know that was there, and we didn't tell you that was there. So so we could learn from that probably. So that's going on there. I think the speed of delivery, the planning process, B&G, how you do that. We've had to navigate all these sort of get-arounds around those, not get-arounds, compromises with our planning colleagues around what are we actually going for in these sites. Because we're going for permanent planning, like we want to be fully compliant, we're not trying to minimise on that, but we also need to work out how can we do near site offset, or can we do credits, or what's our strategy there, and how can we get them into the room to co-design solutions rather than them being distant across the email chasm, as is often the case. I think other things that we can probably look at that then is around the viability. Given some of that challenges, probably if we were to do again, we need to look at stretching the lease term. How can you then look at the rental amount to make sure that it really is attractive for the investment? Taking that risk at the second location, if you relocate, is a massive risk for your partner. So we're probably looking at if you can get that lease term to the length, which means that the investment stacks up in one lease, that's really advantageous. The onward lease to an RP is really important for the exempt accommodation route in terms of being able to how you get through the rent standard. Although if as a local authority leases for more than 10 years, you're in a similar ground as well. So that's a few highlights, I suppose. How about you?
All of that.
And some more.
What are the things to change? I think the thing is that we're not developers. There's no developer margin in our model. We are suppliers of housing, and so therefore the big question mark is groundworks. Where does the groundworks? Where does the responsibility for groundworks? We're very accurate. We know what a house is going to cost and all the rest of it. But groundworks, well, you don't know. Sometimes there's asbestos under there, but so that's something. But the other thing I would ask for is, this is probably a bit silly, but it's about leadership. And I've got to say that it wouldn't have happened without the Housing Festival's involvement and leadership and drive in Bristol. And that they really do have to take credit for that. But equally, you hear everybody complaining about planners and other people and what have you, but to be honest, they're staff doing what they think is best. They're following process and procedures. It requires leadership to change that. And that's what we need. We need it as a country, we need it as an industry, we need it for this problem. And we need leadership, and it's to drive it. And staff mustn't be scared to put their head above the parapet. You learn from mistakes, you don't learn from doing nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what I think will be the breakthrough.
Well, a huge thanks to all of you for being willing to come and share those case studies with us this afternoon, but really for all the effort that's led to them. I know it's not just today; it's years and years of hard work to make those schemes possible. So, yeah, a massive thank you. Tom, I'm going to come to you and see if you've got any reflections, but just a brief one from me, if I may. In the meantime, I think what I think is fascinating about these two case studies is that although we've sort of grouped them together under this sort of banner of demountable solutions for solving the TA crisis, and you sort of think on the face of it they're maybe quite similar, is how different the kind of the constraints around the land were in these two different case studies. So one, you've got a much bigger site, many more units on one particular site, but you're much more constrained sort of in terms of temporally, if that's a word. And in Bristol, the constraints are much more sort of spatial, so that the time is a bit more unknown. It might well be there for a longer period of time, but you're working, on individual sites on different plots. So I think it's really fascinating that although they're similar, actually, that there's this massive difference in the kind of land challenge. And actually, the fact that we've demonstrated that it's possible to deliver on both those schemes is so helpful. To make that comparison. So, Tom, have you got reflections to add?
Yes, I do. Well, first of all, thank you so much. It was really fascinating to see those presentations and hear about some of the challenges involved in delivering these sites. So planning is about making the best use of land, and if this isn't making the best use of land, I don't know what is. Why have a little site sitting there doing nothing except being fly tipped when you could put a lovely modular house on it? Why have a big regen site sitting there, which may be developed out possibly in 15 years, doing nothing? when you could put some wonderful modular homes on it. So for me, what it speaks to is that concept of making the best use of land, I think that the point around how we scale it, that's very, very important. We've got real proof of concept here. We need to be looking at how to scale it. And then finally, I think I would say, sometimes when I talk to people about modular or MMC, it's going to be ugly, porta cabins, that kind of thing. And I think these examples show that doesn't have to be the case. They can be quality, they can be well designed, they can have fantastic interiors for people. Yes, thank you so much, and let's all go out and spread the word.
Thank you so much. Right, we are going to open the conversation up. I know that people are dying to ask questions of the panellists. I also know that, as Jez said, there's massive wealth of experience in the room, and it's really good to make sure that we're hearing from as many people as possible. I'm going to just bring up a couple of questions. And the other thing is, because we're recording the conversation, we have also got a microphone that if we could hand around to ask questions. It won't give you any amplification, so please speak up, but it does help us with our recording. I guess first, before we sort of get into other people's questions, really one for me, because we've kind of framed this conversation here today, thinking that actually we think that there's value in some kind of toolkit, and we haven't fully decided what that's in that, but some way of sort of codifying, I think, what's been learned and producing some kind of resource that would help other local authorities to do something quite similar. So I'd just be really interested to know, maybe just with a show of hands, if people think that's a good idea. Is this a good framing for this conversation? Do we think actually some kind of toolkit is valuable? Hands up if we agree. Okay, great. Well, that's a good start.
We were watching.
Let's open it up. I can see you're dying to ask a question.
Both these projects are fantastic, so well done. If my question's about replicability, and so the misdistributed Einstein quote of in definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again, and thinking back on previous examples I've been involved in, thinking of the docks, so Ilka Holmes and Keepmo put a demonstrator, it's quite similar to this, back in 2017. The Deputy Mayor then, now is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, so good trajectory for him. Keepmo had been broken up, Ilka had gone bust. Hopefully that doesn't happen to roll along or Waits. Tom spoke about Ladywell, which I think I funded under Boris Johnson. Looked great to start with. Is about to be knocked down, I think, by Lewisham Council. And so it's really, what are the things that are different from things that have gone in the past, and how can we have confidence about replicability? And if I can bring someone else in, the other person I'd be keen to hear from is Mark, who's got a lot of experience of that at some point.
Super. Mark, are you happy to respond?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Bajan, and I'm currently working with Croydon, but I previously worked with Lewisham at the time in Place Ladywell, and then I was involved in the Place scheme across London councils to find a solution with support from the GLA, and we did a lot of work and we learned a lot of things, but we didn't really deliver, and we could go into all the reasons why. I think fundamental issue was about the land availability issue, and how long a site needed to be used to make it viable, even if you knew you were going to reuse the demountable unit several times. It was working out a business plan. So we had a 40-year business plan, and each unit had to be used 5 times over 40 years, so we moved 4 times, and the numbers seemed to add up. But we didn't have a provider who was willing to hold the responsibility for taking the unit down at the end of each lease. So this is immediately a completely different model, which I think sounds like it works far better from the local authority point of view, in terms of risk, in terms of financial viability. and we weren't in a position to just go out and buy all the units in the way that Havering have done with this scheme. But I do think it's the land issue that's the fundamental one, and so is 7 years the absolute minimum? Could we do, because a lot of sites, it depends who the owner is, if it's the council or a private owner, but a lot of owners won't give up a site for 7 years or 8 years that easily, even though they probably all know that they're not going to build out in that time, but they don't want to commit to not build in that time. So I've said a lot, but I think that's the fundamental issue, is certainty over availability of land.
Russell, did you want to follow on?
Hi, I'm Russell Curtis. I'm Director of RCK Architects, and we're doing the technical delivery for the Havering project with Grist and Roll on the moment. If you'll indulge me, I have 2 questions and a plea, if I may. First question is technical. One big difference between Bristol and London is that Bristol allows timber-based construction for grant-funded homes, and that's not something that currently can be done in London. I think that's a problem. A sort of exception to the current grant-funded guidance, but it's not enough. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the alignment of standards across cities, across the nation. My other question is really about scale, and everything's a pilot. And how do we stop doing pilots and start ramping up delivery? It feels to me that actually planning isn't the issue. I think others have touched on this. I don't think planning is the issue. I'm not even sure land availability is the issue. The issue is the procurement at the moment. And that's one of the biggest barriers that we have. Fear of procurement, fear of failure, fear of doing something unknown. And I think that's one of the big issues. And Darren and his team is to be congratulated on innovating, actually pushing this project forward, because it could quite easily not happen. And my plea is, can we stop calling it temporary accommodation? The word temporary accommodation diminishes the reality of children who have spent 14 or 15 years living in hotel rooms. That's not temporary, but it also diminishes the good quality homes that we can deliver, because, as Tom's said, you walk into the demonstrating module that we did with Weights and Roller on, that is not a temporary home. I mean, that's better quality than an awful lot of permanent homes, a lot of social rented homes that are out there at the moment. So we need to find another terminology for this. I'll leave it to others to decide what that is, but not temporary accommodation.
Super. I don't know whether Angus or Hugh would like to respond to the materiality.
Do you mind if I dive in on that?
Yeah.
I mean, to the first point, one of the ways that I've found useful to describe it is sort of modular homes for meanwhile use, because, I mean, kind of says what it is, it does what it says on the tin. They are homes, they're modular. You could use the word relocatable. So that's sort of the first point. I think to the point on the model, I think the biggest shift is the private sector arranging the funding. I think that's sort of, and what we've seen out there in the market is there's lots of appetite for sort of pension funds and people with sort of longer views on returns to actually look at this space. Now, I think, being totally frank, the relocation point is the challenge, but I think there's a reality here that, from my experience, local authorities do have land. The procurement, I do think the planning is still there as a bit of a, we're still going on that journey, but we're certainly in a place where we can start making things work for 5 years plus, and take the risk that if it is relocated after 5 years, that's not a huge challenge. That actually it's a surmountable problem when you've got the scale that we believe there is the need and appetite for delivering for the delivery of this approach. And to try and sort of go back, if I go back to some of Jamie's points, we learn the most from where we've been, right? And so looking at these challenging projects, and we could all probably list off various different inside housing reports on particular projects that haven't gone particularly well. And our approach, you know, with Havering was to get experts in the room who have been involved in projects, partnering up with manufacturing partners who have got, you know, broad church and markets they serve, or have got, you know, real expertise and demonstrable sort of delivery where, you know, we don't use the word innovation because we're not innovating. We're having to make sure we respond to, for example, the latest building regs, but that's not innovation. That's the same as any kind of construction that moves on. The kind of technology that sits behind the units is, you know, very similar to temporary buildings that have been in use for decades. And, you know, once we get that into our sort of psyche, it makes a lot of those conversations around investment and redeployable, and, you know, the point around them being used as schools, that there's still a value to the asset if it can't be deployed as housing, if we've solved the housing crisis in 5 or 10 years. I'll let you come to any conclusions about the likelihood of these all becoming schools in 10 years. But it's there as a backstop if we need it.
Angus, can I come to you on the kind of materials?
Yep.
The
Well, we build in light gauge steel, so we're not supportive. That Ladywell was timber, and I think the old thing is there's no such thing as half price gold. Everyone was thrilled at how cheap it was. Well, of course, that was the problem. We're building absolutely permanent to building regs, NDSS space requirements, and we've even done plans for London Plant. We can meet that. So, but you know that you can't. You know that does cost. There's no such thing as half-price gold, and I think that's part of the problem. And I agree with Russell. This use of the word temporary is just all wrong. They are permanent homes that have been designed to be capable of being relocated. They are not temporary homes. Mm-hmm. As I say, NDSS, building regs, quality, they're not. So you can shift them, they will do it. My talking with funders and what have you is not the shifting or relocating of them. They are more than happy to put up the funding. They don't want to end up with the house or any residual. I'm talking in some big numbers. They just say, Angus, just get a deal with the councils where, you know, they can have the house at the end. They sitting in offices with their spreadsheets do not want to be presented with a problem that they own some houses. Even if I said, well, you'll have your money and your interest rate back. They said, we don't want the problem. And the interesting thing is, a couple I'm talking to who are very keen and interested, they are investing council employee pension fund money. So that to me adds to my holistic circle that council employee pension fund monies can invest, get the required return, and it's reducing the temporary housing cost, blah, 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 saving lives. So, you know, this is possible.
Super. On the language, the temporary accommodation language, I wholly agree with the comments really, but Andrea, is that's statutory language built into the financial, is that the, is it dictated from, can we really drop the language temporary accommodation in this context?
Yes and no. You know, yes and no. But you know, between in this kind of context, no problem. I mean, when you're talking about statutory duties, yeah, you can't drop it and change it. But I don't think that's a problem. Can I answer a different question around sort of procurement questions and lease lengths? So totally agree. I don't need any more pilots. So we've got approval to scale up to the next 50. The procurement question, and I'll be briefly technical. So property leases not covered by procurement. However, if you're specifying the spec of the building in any way, then it's qualified as disguised works contract. If it's the value of the leases is over 5.3 million, then it's covered by procurement. So we are going through a procurement process. Went round one, failed because we told them exactly what we wanted to build, and lo and behold, it was possibly a bit tricky. So we're having to redo that and rewrite that, look at lease lengths, all those kind of things. But the question is, are you committed to the outcome? Are you committed to getting it done? And therefore, you just have to iterate until you find a way of getting through the hurdles you have to get through to get the outcome. The challenge we have is in a local authority is if you are process-led, not outcome-led, then if the process says no, you stop. Okay, but if that is not an option because you're committed to the outcome, there is always a way. Everything is a negotiation. procurement is within reason. A negotiation, you talk with your procurement colleagues, you find a way. Planning, negotiation, you talk with your planning colleagues, you work for the same organisation. You know, like, there's a way of doing it. So I think being outcome-led is key. Procurement, yes, it's tricky, but everything's tricky in local authorities. Everything's tricky, you know, but it's how you have to do it. So suck it up, buttercup, and find a way, because there's a way. So that's what I'd say about that.
Can I add
Darren,
a couple of points on the scalability
Yes,
challenge?
please.
Because I think a toolkit is going to be important, because for my colleagues in the homeless sphere, sometimes the firefighting vicarious trauma, it stops people looking up above what's actually going on and seeing the landscape for what it is. But actually a vehicle, so a toolkit and a vehicle or a model. So for instance, I mentioned at the beginning, the Rusty Accommodation Programme was very clear about what you can deliver, how you can deliver it. It's almost as if another vehicle like that gets my particular colleagues focused around, okay, it's there and we can do it. Otherwise, you probably have to think outside of the box to work out that scalability challenge. The other bit is about the demo that we've had at the City Hall, we've had in Havering, our town centre.
Your physical.
That needs to be a part of the conversation, because people need to see it. They need to be in the building to know that actually it's something that people will, would be happy to live in as well. And I think that needs to continue to move around London and be part of the conversation, so that people are always having that conversation and want to do something about it.
And whereabouts is that house now?
So at the moment, I think it's back at.
It's in Dorset.
Yes.
No one can find me land.
Yeah.
Unbelievably, I cannot place that anywhere. So this is about, there's some challenge about being outcome-led. So I don't think this is, and I'm going to be honest, I don't think this isn't because there is no land in zone 1, 2, 3 or 4. I can put this 9-metre modular. There's not a will to make it happen, unfortunately. If I'm being honest, that could be sat here, sat anywhere, could deliver it tomorrow. It's ready. It is no use in my factory in Dorset whatsoever.
Well, hopefully somebody in this room will have an answer.
Questions,
There were several hands. There were hands here first.
Who was up first? Come on, be honest.
No.
I did get a jump up.
I'm Claire Hudson. I'm from One Public Estate and we host the Payments Programme for We've got 2 offers really and an ask. So the first offer is around that kind of scalability, and imminently we're going to launch a process to identify sites across all the boroughs in London. We've got a couple already where we know this might be an option. We've already spoken with Darren, so that's great. So keep an eye out for that, and that's something in One Public Estate that we can coordinate on behalf of all the boroughs, and also working closely with partners in places like EFE, who have quite a lot of land that they no longer need for education purposes, and also for GLA. So that's offer 1. Offer 2 is around the groundworks. Next week we're going to be launching the latest iteration of the Groundwood Land Release Fund. That is exactly to fund these kind of issues that we found: asbestos, unexploded devices, etc. Also access to services, which we know can be an issue in infill sites. So there's going to be another release of that next week, and then we're working on a much larger programme coming forward in 2026. And then an ask, and this comes back to the how do we scale it up, and how do we kind of really make this a part of how we operate. We talk about cost avoidance, and we all know how much temporary accommodation is costing in London, or we have a guess at how much it's costing in London. But actually, I'm really interested in the kind of cost savings of those better outcomes for the people living in the homes. And I'd really like us to think about how are we baking that in to our model, how are we making sure that we capture that, and how are we then kind of translating that into our financial planning.
Want to take another question as well on here?
Yes.
Hi, Guy Ray. Thanks for the presentation. I know most of you can help. But I guess just a question which is building on Tom's point around larger regen schemes, and how do we kind of set a carrot for developers in this equation. So if we've got a lot of land currently tied up with developers for 10 to 15 years, what's the incentive for them taking on all of the risk of potential novelty, like the opportunity, and how do we wrap, I guess, the savings that they can make from enabling works into that equation. Separately from that, just a point on the toolkit, which I think talks a little bit to what was just raised, is there a kind of point that we can get to where we're able to calculate the savings geographically for a particular borough, to demonstrate those very quickly when we're engaging in those conversations with local authorities? Because talking a bit down this point, what we found is that we're pitching those to the development teams within local authorities, but that's not necessarily translating to the housing plan teams, and so that's a little bit offensive to those conversations.
Super. Any of our panel want to volunteer to?
Yeah. I totally agree on the financial impact of moving someone into a better accommodation. I also just don't think it computes in a local authority setting, because there's just no space on the balance sheet for it. And there's just not a line. You know, it's not a real financial pressure in year, and that's, you know, I don't like saying that. It's disappointing, but really, if you want to gain traction in a local authority setting, you need to demonstrate to your 151, if we do this, it goes down here, the pressure. And there is a wealth of research around the financial advantage on a broader sense of settled accommodation, high quality accommodation, but from a local authority, they're like infants in that space. Perhaps I'm being a bit rude, though, I don't mean to be, but it's just 1+1 stuff. It can't think outside of that box because of the pressure they're under. The cost saving thing, you're absolutely right. Don't talk to the housing delivery guys. They don't carry the budget pressure. So you need to be talking to well, you can answer that, Darren. Who should you speak to?
Yeah, well, actually, it is a part of our budget conversations where we talk about, cost avoidance, and I've embedded that into the modelling in my area about how cost avoidance looks. And it's really simple. We've got hotels and nightly paid accommodation. Those numbers are really clear and simple. I think sometimes there is a bit of fear in terms of, okay, well, you say you're going to do this, but the demand is still there as well. So you have to overcome some of those points, but actually the cost avoidance conversation is a lot easier to get that across, except you need your business partners as well, who have to also step up and not be afraid to have a conversation with their 151 officer and say this is a real possibility. So.
I think I'd add to that as well, that it's not just the direct cost of the TA. There was a piece of work that one of my colleagues did within Waits, which pulled together an assessment of the healthcare outcomes of living in inappropriate accommodation, the educational outcomes, and it came to about 63,000 a year in total cost to the public purse for a families living in temporary accommodation. So it is wider than just the direct costs for the hotel, the supporting staff. It goes further, and I'd happily dig that out and share it with anyone.
No, super. I certainly think this piece of this conversation is part of answering that question about what we actually need to unlock aggregated delivery. It's really obvious there's a financial modelling piece that would need to be part of that toolkit. Got some more questions in the middle.
Hi, David Hughes from Fuse Architects. Along with scalability, I'd just like to get views or conversations around that speed. About 2 years ago, the G15 got together and came up with Project 123, which was to look at temporary housing, named after 1 in 23 children being homeless. We now always say to them, if you rebrand it to Project 121, we've been talking about it for 2 years. Havering, I think what you guys are doing is brilliant. Havering, you've been talking about it for 3.5 years, 3 years, and it's not yet finished. We've got pilots coming out of our ears, which take forever. And this is a problem that is getting worse daily. How do we speed it up along with scalability? How do we get procurement particularly? I think the work we're doing, what Paul's been doing, HTA, RCKA, product is there. We can literally deliver this tomorrow morning. We can provide houses tomorrow. Bureaucratic fear is what seems to slow it down. I'm a humble architect that draws pretty pictures. I cannot understand how to make it quicker. So hopefully the people in the room give me the answers.
Sure. Yeah, I suppose I just add in terms of manufacturers that we've worked with, what they love is the pipeline. So it also has to work from a manufacturing point of view. So, you know, manufacturers need to have a hopper full of projects that they can bid for and that they can see happening over a long period of time. And that sort of, you know, the reasons why the ILCAs keep most and the others fail is because that hopper just emptied, or it took too long to deliver. And it couldn't scale up to bring down the cost. So, yeah, we have to think about the input of all of this. I'm totally with you in terms of, you know, our frustrations with sort of, at the speed at which you know, decision making happens. And I do wonder whether or not we need an agency outside of all of this. You know, do we need a special purpose vehicle? You know, a small government pango. I know everybody hates them, but do we need another voice?
I'm just chuckling because it's the first time we've really talked about LMC, and I think about Jezef and Homes England. It must be the first time LMC is the problem, but it's the sleep, so it's good news then. We've got, I think we've got, so the panel, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the, I can't disagree with anything that you've said, gents. I think for me, the private sector has got to step up and support the public sector, and certainly what we're sort of driving towards is all of those sort of bottlenecks and challenges. How can we take those solutions on as the private sector, whether it's the funding. I know we talked about permanent planning, but by going for a temporary planning, you know, we feel that it dials the conversation down and therefore speeds it up. And the missing part is the funding piece, and you know, the Havering project I think is a fantastic exemplar for the product, you know, but contractually you have to go through the procurement piece. So if we can get the lease and the leaseback work in, which reduces how many touch points there are and focuses on the outcome, and then we can get together and focus as the private sector on delivering those outcomes and be held to account by the sector for the quality and the pace and the affordability for the public sector. That for me is, I think, our biggest opportunity to shift the dial, just taking that responsibility, and then once it's been seen a bit more, which I'm confident it will be, and it has been, then hopefully that 2-year run into a project will slim right down.
Does anybody else want to speak into the pace?
Yeah, I mean, it's just really hard. I mean, you to find leadership in a local authority setting who has capacity to be able to bring other leadership alongside them to agree a kind of process or a priority on a project is exactly what you need. And that's incredibly hard to find. And so being able to identify who are the key people in a local authority who are carrying the pressure and the responsibility, how can you provide that sort of sense of a route map for them? But ultimately they have to someone has to drive it and take ownership internally to get from here to there. And we can't do that from the outside. It's incredibly difficult to. You have to have someone key inside who holds it and drives it and takes ownership across departments to get to the outcome. So I'm sure, and I'm in the weeds, so perhaps my vision is too blinkered in that, but there'll be heaps that we can do outside the design stuff that will help that. But without leadership inside, it will always be very, very slow.
Can I just add one thing? So I think what is interesting, some of you will be aware of the Small Sites Aggregator, which is a project that Copley's been supporting as well. I think one of the things we recognise in local government is there is a challenge around the capacity, the competence and the confidence of them, because we have had years and years of austerity, and one of the things we're looking at, what is the partnerships where local government can sort of identify what they have to do and where therefore they can create those collaborations and partnerships. So for example, can they get the land out into a JV structure or some other vehicle, which was being alluded to here, to speed it up. But also they can still therefore, you know, take curation and control over the planning, because that sits with the LPA. But there's an element of what's the reductionist element of where the right trust and the right partnerships can really help local government say, look, back to outcomes, this is what we need. And I think the models here are demonstrating actually some of that, it could be structured differently. There could be less expectation on the local government doing all of it because there is these partnerships. So I think that's part of the challenge, is where can you accelerate speed, where can you create the partnerships, but what also can you then say to the local government, this is the bit we need you to do, and focus relentlessly on getting right. And I think that's part of the conversation with the toolkit. Other questions?
Emily Berwin, Meanwhile Space. So I would like to come at this from a slightly different angle. I think the public and private sector is super important and scale is really important. But what about the third sector, and what about that much finer grain when we're looking at places and how these kinds of projects can maybe respond in a more bespoke way, working with the community to deliver community infrastructure that is needed in those particular places, so that we can provide a stronger future for the people that are going into those places? How do we look at this on a much kind of finer grain, probably on difficult sites where that dreaded viability word doesn't stack up? You know, we're met a lot with that kind of resistance of actually you can provide residential affordable housing on the upper floors and work with them in a co-creation on a ground floor opportunity in a way that stitches into that neighbourhood and the community in a much more kind of positively impactful way for the people who are there as well. But that, you know, it doesn't always stack up. It can just about wash its face, but it's probably not scalable, but it's a more bespoke offer. So I think we've talked a lot about scalability, and that's obviously important, but how do we look at more bespoke solutions and a kind of place-making element of this?
Super. Yeah, let's have a little brief question.
Sam Ashton from London Councils. I think the key question here really is the financial models, and that's, I think, what is holding back scalability. And the blocker there really is risk. Who holds the risk? How big is the risk? What is your appetite for risk? And we know that Section 151 officers generally have a very limited appetite for risk. And really, if you look at it, there's a whole range of solutions and products in the temporary accommodation space. Meanwhile, sites is just one arsenal in the toolkit. And if we're being honest, even if we were to be able to scale up these solutions, you know, Meanwhile is not going to solve the temporary accommodation crisis as a whole, because there just isn't going to be the scale necessary for the number of houses. But all these kind of models come back to appetite for risk and who is going to hold that. And I think a question is, when you scale these projects, you also scale the risk, and the numbers get big and scary. So I guess in Bristol, you've got this solution where the risk is being held by the funder, but you know, how are you managing that? And is there the possibility for that funding to exist? You know, if the sites were scaled further.
So I was just going to go back to the land issue, and particularly the link with transport. So I think Tommy might have mentioned that obviously we've got a new London plan coming soon. There's going to be safeguarded land for things like Crossrail 2 and other big transport infrastructure projects, and those are the ideal sites where we all know a lot of those schemes aren't going to come forward for at least 10 years. So, for example, in Croydon at the moment, we're working with Network Rail on the remodelling of the tracks coming in and out of East Croydon Station. It's not funded yet, but hopefully will be funded in the next 10 years, but there are possibly, meanwhile, opportunities there, so we're looking at that. And another example would be in Haringey. So there's a scheme called Olive Morris Court, some people might know it, which was targeted at Ross Sleepers, so that's, again, a modular solution. So some really good examples, but you know, what are we doing? I don't know if this fits with One Public Estates role, but what are we doing to link up councils looking at safeguarded land across London?
Tom, you mentioned earlier on about the work we're doing with the TfL. Is this a conversation that's happening between the GLA and TfL?
Yeah, it's definitely something that's being thought about. I mean, you know, we all like Crossrail to come on stream in our lifetimes, but that might not be the case. And you know, there are all sorts of safeguarded sites that could benefit from meanwhile use. There might also be benefits from, you know, no, sorry, I'll leave it there.
Can I come in on the placemaking point? Because I think that's something which, you know, we very much endeavoured to include in our sort of journey on the Havering scheme. And actually, you know, HTA hosted a workshop not just with the sort of internal, if you like, stakeholders, but actually, you know, we spoke to our neighbours, we spoke to the residents who'd be living in the space who are currently stuck in sort of hostel type accommodation to understand actually what this meant for them. And I'd sort of go back, when we launched the demonstrator at the Build Centre at the Housing Festivals exhibition last year, we also launched our playbook. And I know, playbook sort of turns everyone off instantly, but I would encourage everyone to just have a look in there and share any feedback, because what we tried setting out 10 steps from site identification all the way through to running the homes, as an asset, and how the different options on that pathway. And a key part to the journey is having an architect employed to properly understand that placemaking journey, which is sort of different to the technical side of deploying the product. And I think we need to be proud of the fact that these are standard products that can be deployed to a high quality very quickly, but there's also a huge amount of skill needed to make sure that they're deployed appropriately, both visually, from a community placemaking perspective, they're safe, there's no crime designed in, all of those really important things that we think about when we're designing permanent homes, but need to be really sort of considered, especially when you're scaling up to sort of larger projects and more urban, sort of denser environments.
What's the difference from your playbook and the standardised approach in the toolkit?
I'd say we're sort of, very similar, to be fair. Yeah, similar. We did,
Just needs the GLA stamp of approval.
Just needs some feedback.
There's probably something as well.
I'll have to stamp back at City Hall.
There's probably something about the financing models, isn't there?
Yeah.
We need to sort of go back to the question around what is the financial models. And I mean, Sam, I just want to jump in. The question of risk is, let's be really clear, it's local government that carries the risk. Because the cost of not providing this housing sits directly on their balance sheet and the revenue pressure. So I think this is the bit we've got to change. And we agree with you that this is one of a number of solutions. This is not the solution, but it's about that outcome approach. So, and the modelling is there, that can be shared. Right, questions, where am I going? Ellen, direct me, I'm just the pretty help.
On the end, Bronwyn.
Thank you. Sorry, it's not really a question, it was more of a comment. And so I think I'm really encouraged, sorry, I'm Brown Woven from the FT, I'm really encouraged by what I hear in the room. I think there's a lot of will, there's a lot of answers, and I guess part of my worry is that we are the people who are willing to do it. We'll be careful that there's other people out there who aren't like that, and just thinking about what we need and what would change it. And I just think what I hear is we can do this quickly and we can change, like the outcome we're trying to tackle here is people in crisis accommodation, and we can build houses. If we're going to spend 3 or 4 years, if it's going to be really hard, we could just build traditional houses. So if we're going to look at modular, it must be quick. We must stop making it hard for local authorities, and we must utilise that meanwhile use, because when you build a house, it is there. And that meanwhile use, I just think when we're looking at the standardised approach in the toolkit, are we really doing enough to bring out what is the difference here? And it must be easier. I don't think it sounds really hard, and that is just not going to work for all the London councils and all the local authorities. It's great some of you guys are doing it. We have got to make it easier for others, and I just think we all need to really focus on how to make it quicker, how to make it easier, and how can we use that land. And I think that is the other really exciting aspect, is can we use land that local authorities and the public sector have creatively. And I just think we should really try and pull those aspects out. So that's not really
back, middle, yes, there's 2 hands. Can we get both of them, one after the other?
I'm Jonathan Ting from the Church of England's National Housing Initiative. I think one of the key questions is the one of leadership, which I think Angus brought out. We're trying to release, and the Church of England owns lots of little pockets of land all over the country. We're trying to find ways to help parishes and dioceses to release some of that land. But the leadership question, where does the initiative best come from? Does it need to come from the local authorities first? Or can it come from the landowners? Can it come from the MMC providers? Can it come from the funders? I'm not really sure, but there's a big need for leadership here, risk-taking, entrepreneurial leadership, and I'm just trying to think, how can we mobilise that leadership? How can we encourage more people to step out? But does it all have to, if it's got to come from local authorities, then can we work with the GLH and try and encourage us to some sort of national? Yeah.
Andrew Hawley from Strata. Really good to see so many people interested in this model, first of all. I guess my point kind of builds on Paul's one, which is appetite. So I'm just interested to know from everyone, in terms of their touch points with central government, is there support for models like this? Or do we feel that the answer is let's build 1.5 million homes?
Second. Either latter.
And how do we change it?
I've got a follow-on from that one. So I think probably, Frank Borough from Strata as well. Are we looking at this in the wrong way, and are we confusing two things? One is a permanent home, and one is actually what we're talking about, to cut through it, is a cash flow crisis and a betterment of people's lives. And I think until we start talking about temporary homes as an aid to a solution, which is providing permanent houses, we'll get stuck in the same dialogue. So in my mind, the question is not what local government can do, but what can centralised government to do to go, if we are spending X amount on nightly rents and hotels, okay, even if it's the same cost for these things, we have a great control of what that cash flow is, because a hotel can change its rates at any day, and we can control the flow of money and give betterment to lives whilst we've got the current solution. So in my mind, it's looking at what we gain from that perspective, as opposed to looking at this as a round solution.
I'm going to take those and then we'll take another round.
Yeah, who would like to come in? Tom, I'm conscious you've got to.
I've got to leave.
I
would answer the government one. I mean, what I would say is, I mean, first of all, there is support for from the government for things like the small sites aggregator, which involves MMC, which Jez is very involved in. And secondly, if we're going to build 1.5 million homes, we need to be doing that across the entire piece. We need to be firing on all cylinders. Every single part of the sector, every single sector needs to be delivering. And if we can add a bit more through, temporary modular housing, meanwhile use, then that's going to add something towards that incredible target. And now I have to leave. Thank you all very much.
As Tom leaves, can I just say, we talked about leadership. We're really grateful, Tom, that you're here. We're going to follow up with you around sort of development this toolkit. We'd love to share that with you. And I know one of the things we gathered around, and you feel very strongly about, there's currently 180,000 children living in temporary accommodation. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. I know that we all gather around that crisis. So we're thankful for your time today. We're thankful for your leadership. We will follow up, and we'll see if we can come up with some ideas to work on together. So can we give those men
Can I just comment on the leadership piece, Jonathan? Maybe I've come across not quite right there. I don't think it needs to be led from local government, but whether it's led from the outside to the inside, you need someone inside who can run with it internally, is what I mean. So absolutely, I think there's a bandwidth question around how many approaches local government gets, and it's a lot. But also, you want the good ideas coming in, and if they've got a grip of the idea they need to change what they're doing to deliver a different outcome and a better balance sheet, they'll be open to anything. Fish out of water, they're absolutely gasping.
But equally on that point, as I understand it, the temporary accommodation statutory duty that local authorities have is part of what makes the viability for these models work.
Yes, and I think some of the standpoints are really important to this, because when we talk about risk, and the uncomfortable conversation has to be had around local authorities are facing 114 notifications. 3, I think, probably in the next sort of several months, could be really close to that notification. And part of that is 20% of their budget pressures is temporary accommodation. And that is going to creep up. And actually, as Hugh said, it's probably wider than that if you factor in the social care issues that come along with that. So that's the risk. So if 114 direction is one avenue, or you look at the 20% of the budget pressure, which is the 1.6 billion a year that is spent on emergency accommodation, and that can be repurposed. A lot of that 1.6 billion is subsidy, and because of that subsidy challenge, local authorities are fighting those fires. So, you know, just switch the subsidy element off with a modular approach, and there are sufficient stalled sites at the moment that can deliver this. So we probably need to go back to that, that period after the Second World War, where we said home building is our priority, and that's what we're going to do. Except the challenge today is temporary accommodation that we need to address, and that has to be said now. And central government has to lead that conversation. So as far as the 1.5 million homes, I think we need to narrow our focus to the 180,000 children, because actually that's the key pressure. The 1.5 million, I think, comes from the waiting list on every local authority's housing register. Many of those people aren't in emergency accommodation. Yep. So if you narrow your focus, then we're talking about 70,000 homes that we can address, and that is an easier challenge to meet than it is to say, oh, let's try and do 1.5 million.
Yeah, I think that's a
Got two more.
I do believe that it does need to be a government, central government-led initiative. We've got so many small sites in London that are basically house builders that have come, under fire from the new regulations, etc. Dave and I have spoken to so many of them. If we had incentive and they were encouraged and it was monetarised or forced almost to give up part of that site to temporary accommodation, we'd be looking at a different outcome. We've spoken to Berkeley Homes, we've spoken to lots of different house builders, and they want to know what is in it for us. I think that's what we need to address. I think it's a really, really big issue that means that it's not going anywhere, and they don't have to do anything about it.
Hi, Richard Kennedy from Cornerstone Place. Thank you for bringing us all together. It's been a really fascinating conversation. I think Andrew's, for me, hit a really big nail, which is culture within local authorities, and it's certainly what we've found. And I think part of it is this culture change. We need to change the way local authorities think about the outcome, and I think the way you articulate it was very clear. But I think part of the problem is the incentives for those officers. So the incentives at the moment are, don't do something wrong so I don't get fired. And I'm really interested in Darren and your view, Andrew, on this, but how do we create an environment in local authorities where they are encouraged to be innovative, to create solutions, rather than encouraged to follow, hang on, there's a template over here, a procurement thing over here that means we don't do anything, and actually if I end up not doing anything, I'm not going to get sacked. If I end up taking a risk and it doesn't quite go to plan, I might be. So how can we change incentives in local authorities?
Yeah, so mine wasn't really a question, mine was to reassure people. I think there is it's a paradigm of what the industry can supply the demand, but Angus will tell you, our factory can do this, you know what I mean, not just my factory, Angus's, people who aren't here. I suppose it could be a question is, last week we got an inquiry for SEND buildings, same type of problem, SEND building, local authorities sending the kids out of area to get, they've got a pressure on savings, so they're doing it. This week, so that was last week, we met with the planner on Wednesday, we got permitted development rights today, local authority placed an order, we're going to install on January 1st. It works with education, you know what I mean? Still building regs compliant, still DFE isn't an easy thing to overcome, but it works with education.
We are actually now over time, so I might suggest that we actually need to start just having these conversations outside.
Do you want to respond to those? Or should we carry on?
I think maybe let's pick those up.
Should we wrap it up then? Okay.
We're hoping some of you, and well, I hope all of you, can stay and join us for a drink. We're very grateful to Place for people in Strata who've made today possible. I think I just want to close on the absurdity of the situation, which is the sort of the burning platform is also the opportunity. So it's very rare. I mean, I think I'm actually very excited about this because it's very rare you get an opportunity, particularly with the sort of local government lens, to see where you can save money and at the same time provide a much better outcome for people. Yep. Normally what we're talking about is cuts that affect the most vulnerable people in our communities. Here, because of the revenue saving that is burning that hole in local government, there is a massive opportunity to work collectively across the council. And I know we talk about how hard this is, but we need to give huge credit to Havering, at Borough. You know, we need to give huge credit to Bristol City Council, because despite how hard it is, what we have demonstrated is this is achievable. There is an absolute demonstrable model that can show to your Section 151, through to your Chief Exec, through to your councillors, through to your procurement officers, through to your legal officers, through to the whole life supply of how we get this done. We've done it. It's been delivered. There are people in this room that know how hard it's been. The good news is that is, I believe, scalable without losing contact with our communities. But let's be encouraged. The invitation, as we break today, is to say, okay, we can leave this room and get on with our lives. What we're really looking for is to create, as we've done here with Havering, as we've seen in Bristol, with the right partners, it's this coalition of the willing. We can often say, well, whose job is it? Is it national government? Well, there's a role for national government. Is it local? There's a role. But also, if we worked collectively, there's a role for us to come together and just make this work. Because then we've answered all of the questions. We've de-risked it, and it can be scaled. And we know between us in this room how we can then navigate that back into where is the land. It could be church land, a model for the churches to engage with, which brings the money. The exam question that Bristol City Council posed was, can we get housing built for temporary accommodation to meet children who are currently in emergency managed homelessness that's going to cost us nothing and save money? The answer is yes, it can be done. So the invitations you leave, there's the envelopes out on the side. There's 3 envelopes for you to put your lanyards in. The first envelope says, this has been amazing, I want to be part of this community of practice.
That's the biggest envelope.
It's the biggest envelope. and I would love to be part of this ongoing conversation around this sort of MMC demountable model, because we need your expertise. There's another envelope that says, actually, this is not quite my thing, but I'm really interested more in what else that community of practice is doing, because I don't believe we drive change in our silos. It has to be this collection of gathering. And the third envelope it says basically, I think you're all a bit nuts, good luck, crack on, and please don't bother me. And that's fine. We will know who you are, but that's fine. But with genuine sincerity, because I am too impatient and I am too angry about the status quo. So you and I tonight, we will go back to our homes and we will probably be able to turn on our heating and we'll probably feed our children. There are too many people that for that is not the reality. That's not acceptable in our society. So most of us that came into this space, we came in because we care about housing as how we do society, how we build community, how we build resilience as a country. And yet we are overseeing a system that's holding people in systemic poverty. Well, we can talk about change in government, but we can also talk about how we empower change. And I am much more interested in saying, can I have the right people in the room that we collectively work on? We work on the answers, we work through the powers of influence that we have, and we become the agents of change. It will not happen if we wait for another change in government. Let's be really clear. I'm all for the politicians and I admire them, but this is not just a 2-year change management program. So if you're interested, you would be part of that journey, we would love to work more with you. And the good news is, we know it's achievable. It's been done. So to all the points in the room about can we do it faster and can we scale it, the answer is yes, but only if we do it together. So thank you for being here. There's a lot of expertise, we're really grateful. We look forward to working on this together. Let's get it done. Thank you, Darren.